Good day, dear students. You are welcome to our today's lesson on the course Translation Problems. Today we are going to study the fifth lecture, which is called Equivalence in Translation, the fourth type of equivalence. Please write down the plan of our lecture. There are 4 points. First, formal correspondence and dynamic equivalence. Second, shifts of translation. Third, characteristic features of the fourth type of equivalence. Fourth, changes of structures in the fourth type of equivalence. This point has 2 subpoints. Point A, variation of a word order in translation, and point B, change of a number and types of sentences in translation. Besides 5 widely used types, there are also 2 different types of equivalence. Namely, formal equivalence is referred to as formal correspondence and dynamic equivalence. Formal correspondence focuses attention on the message itself, in both form and content, unlike dynamic equivalence, which is based upon the principle of equivalent effect. Formal correspondence consists of a target language item which represents the closest equivalent of a source language word or phrase. There are not always formal equivalents between language pairs. These formal equivalents should be used wherever possible if the translation aims at achieving formal rather than dynamic equivalence. The use of formal equivalence might at times have serious implications in the target text, since the translation will not be easily understood by the target audience. Typically, formal correspondence distorts the grammatical and stylistic patterns of the receptor language and hence distorts the message so as to cause the receptor to misunderstand or to labor unduly hard. Dynamic equivalence is defined as a translation principle according to which a translator seeks to translate the meaning of the original in such a way that the target language wording will trigger the same impact on the target language audience as the original wording did upon the source text audience. Frequently, the form of the original text is changed, but as long as the change follows the rules of back transformation in the source language, of contextual consistency in the transfer, and of transformation in the receptor language, the message is preserved as the translation is faithful. Some scientists are in favor of the application of dynamic equivalence as a more effective translation procedure. This is perfectly understandable if we take into account the context of the situation in which the translation phenomenon is dealt upon. Thus, the product of the translation process, that is, the text in the target language, must have the same impact on the different readers it was addressing. Dynamic equivalence in translation is far more than mere correct communication of information. The main contribution in the field of translation theory is the introduction of the concepts of types and shifts of translation. There are very broad types of translation in terms of three criteria. The extent of translation, that is, full translation and partial translation. The grammatical rank at which the translation equivalence is established. Rank-bound translation and unbound translation. The levels of language involved in translation, that is, total translation and restricted translation. In rank-bound translation, an equivalent is sought in the target language for each word or for each morpheme encountered in the source text. In unbounded translation, equivalences are not tied to a particular rank, and we may additionally find equivalencies at sentence, clause, and other levels. One of the problems with formal correspondence is that, despite being a useful tool to employ in comparative linguistics, it seems that it is not really relevant in terms of assessing translation equivalence between source text and target text. For this reason, we now turn to other dimension of correspondence, namely textual equivalence, which occurs when any target language text or portion of text is observed on a particular occasion to be the equivalent of a given source language text or portion of text. It is implemented by a process of commutation whereby a competent bilingual informant or translator is consulted on the translation of various sentences whose source text items are changed in order to observe what changes, if any, occur in the target language text as a consequence. As far as translation shifts are concerned, they are defined as departures from formal correspondence in the process of going from the source language to the target language. There are two main types of translation shifts, namely level shifts, where source language item at one linguistic level, for example grammar, has a target language equivalent at a different level, for example lexis, and category shifts, which are divided into four types. First, structure shifts, which involve a grammatical change between the structure of the source text and that of the target text. Second, class shifts, when a source language item is translated with a target language item which belongs to a different grammatical class. That means a verb may be translated with a noun. Third, unit shifts, which involve change in rank. Fourth, intra-system shifts, which occur when source language and target language possess systems which approximately corresponds formally as to their constitution, but when translation involves selection of a non-corresponding term, in the target language system. For instance, when the source language singular becomes a target language plural. Characteristic features of the fourth type of equivalence. The initial structure with the basic meaning, the do action, can give a number of structures which retain this basic meaning and differ only in additional syntactic meaning. For example, the boy is reading. The reading of the boy. The reading boy and read by the boy. So, if we use in translation a syntactic structure within the frames of the fourth type of equivalence, it will keep to full extent the basic meaning of the original structure. For example, I told him what I thought of her. Characteristic features of the fourth type of equivalence are characterized by common logical syntactic ties, and at the same time each structure has its own syntactic meaning, which differentiates it from other ones. For example, he was never tired of old songs. I don't see that I need to convince you. The fourth type of equivalence is characterized by the following features. First, retention of the purport of communication. Second, retention of the situation. Third, retention of the general notions which determine the method of translation. And fourth, the invariant meaning of the syntactic structure. The word order in a statement may carry out one of its main functions. There are three functions. First, be the means of expressing a certain grammatical category. Second, provide semantic connection between the parts of a statement and the neighboring statements. Third, point out at the emotional character of a statement. A backward order of the original cannot be rendered in translation, but the transmission of the emotional character by other means are used. For example, mine is a long and sad story. Him I have never seen. The equivalence in translation will be established between sentences of different types, but with the identical inner structure. In other words, the changes of a type and number of independent sentences will take place in translation. The translation process cannot simply be reduced to a linguistic exercise, since there are also other factors such as textual, cultural, and situational aspects, which should be taken into consideration when translating. In other words, some scientists do not believe that linguistics is the only discipline which enables people to carry out a translation, since translating involves different cultures and different situations at the same time, and they do not always match from one language to another. Now, dear students, you are given control questions. First, Speak on formal correspondence and dynamic equivalence. Explain their difference in a detailed way. Second, speak on the shifts of translation. And the third, describe changes of structures in the fourth type of equivalence. And give examples, please. Here you are given references and supplementary literature which will be necessary for you during your preparation for your seminar lessons. Thank you for your attention.